Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Polenta Lasagna Loaf. That's right, all's well that ends well. But before I got to that happy ending, I experienced one of the great kitchen disasters in Food Wish history, which I will happily show you later, and just that's probably good enough reason to watch the video. But the real reason you should check this out is because this was, without a doubt, the best polenta dish I've ever had. Period, end of sentence, full stop, for real. And to get started, the first thing we'll do is cook some polenta, which begins by salting some water and bringing it to a boil on high heat. And once that starts simmering, we'll go ahead and whisk in our polenta, and we will keep whisking for about a minute or two until the mixture starts to thicken up, at which point we'll reduce our heat to about medium-low. And we will cook this stirring for about 30 minutes or until our polenta is done. And we don't have to stir constantly, but very often is a good idea. And because the coarseness of the grind can really vary between brands, exact times can be kind of tricky, but we want to cook this until all those grains of corn are soft, and it's lost that undercooked bitter aftertaste, which is definitely the best way to tell. So I'm going to guess that's going to happen between like 25 and 35 minutes. And also keep in mind we're going to bake this in the oven for an hour, so slightly underdone is fine, but we do want this pretty much cooked all the way. And then once we think we've reached that point, we'll go ahead and pull it off the stove. And we will quickly but carefully whisk in some butter and some Parmesan cheese. And that is pretty much it for our polenta. As soon as that's mixed in, while this is still hot and flexible, we will transfer that onto a silicone baking mat. Or if you have to, some oil foil or parchment paper will work. And then we'll take a spatula and spread that out as evenly as we can. And while I'm going to go almost all the way to the edge lengthwise, but as far as the width goes, I'm going to stay about 1.5 inches from the edge. And you will see why as soon as this is cold and we cut it. So we'll go ahead and spread that out as shown, at which point we'll lay a piece of plastic wrap over the top, and we will kind of smooth that out and spread it out with our hands, which is probably all you have to do to get this nice and even. But just to hedge our bets, we'll give that a little press with a pan. And once that's been accomplished, we'll transfer this on top of the pan, and we will pop that in the fridge until it's firm, which will happen at room temp, but it's just faster in the fridge. And that's it. Once it is nice and firm, we'll go ahead and unwrap it. And then we'll take a pizza wheel or a very dull knife, and we will cut this into 4 equal rectangles, which I know from previous testing will just about perfectly fit a 9x5 loaf pan. And of course, if you have to do a little extra trimming on the edges to make it fit perfectly, go ahead. And be careful handling this. It's a little bit fragile, so don't be tossing it around like I am. And then once that's set, we can move on to our very simple cheese filling, which will include the best ricotta we can buy. And not to brag, but mine was made in a little basket. And then to that we will add some real Parmesan cheese, also known as Parmigiano Reggiano. We'll also toss in some grated mozzarella. And then we'll season that up with a little bit of kosher salt, freshly ground black pepper, and cayenne. And then we'll finish up with 1 beaten egg and a couple tablespoons of freshly chopped Italian parsley. And we'll take a spoon and give this a mix. And other than about 3 cups of our favorite pasta sauce, which we will heat up ahead of time, we are now ready to assemble our Polenta Lasagna Loaf, which we will do in this loaf pan generously greased with olive oil. And since the bottom's going to be the top, I laid in my nicest piece first, with the smoother side down. And once that first piece of polenta is down, we'll go ahead and top that with exactly 1/3 of our cheese mixture, since this is going to be built with 4 layers of polenta and 3 layers of cheese and sauce. And we will spread that out as evenly as we can, at which point we'll top that with about 1 cup of our pasta sauce. And my favorite sauce for this would be a meat sauce made with sausage, since sausage and sweet corn always pair really well together. So I think this works very nicely with the polenta. And if 1 or 2 of your pieces are less perfect than the others, I would probably use those in the middle layers. Although this is sort of going to all meld together, so it really doesn't matter. But anyway, we'll continue building these layers, going polenta, then cheese, then sauce, then polenta, then cheese, then sauce, until we eventually finish with our 4th piece of polenta. And of course, if you're into it, you could throw all kinds of things in this. I mean, you guys are after all the playas of your layers. And you could add things like sauteed mushrooms or maybe some spinach. But if you do, just be careful. We don't want to fill this up past the top of the pan. And that's it. Once that last piece of polenta gets put on, we'll give that a quick old shaka and old tappa. And we'll transfer that onto a sheet pan, since this will definitely bubble over. And the last thing you want on the bottom of your oven is lasagna juice. And that's it. We're going to wrap the top with foil, but we're going to try to tend it up a little bit so it's not pressed against that top layer. At which point this is now ready to go into the center of a 375-degree oven for 1 hour, or until it looks like this. All right, hold on a second. Let's go ahead and pull off the foil. And I was hoping it didn't stick, and it didn't. But anyway, until it looks like this. And then before we serve this, we're definitely going to want to let it cool down for like 15 or 20 minutes, since it is pretty much polenta lasagna soup at this point. Oh, and I should mention, all my chefy instincts were telling me not to try to invert this onto a platter, and instead just grab a spoon or spatula and serve it out of this. But I did not listen to those instincts, or the instinct that I should have used a towel since that was really hot. But anyway, I went ahead and tried to unmold this, since I really wanted to see it sitting up high and proud. And it started off well, but then I realized I had a problem, which was my top layer of polenta was sticking to the bottom. So that was unfortunate. But as you well know, we never let the food win. So I did what any chef who doesn't follow his instincts would do. And I scraped it out with a spatula and tried to piece it back together on top. Oh, and if you think this was the kitchen disaster I was referring to in the intro, it is not. Right, that occurred on a previous attempt, which you're about to see right now. I was going to flip it over onto this cutting board so I could cut slices, and it fell. And I swore 5 times in 3 different languages, since I will admit to being a little bit angry. So I grabbed a fork and started to rage eat. And you know what? It was so incredibly delicious that I went from being angry to being extremely pleased. I mean, everything, the taste, the texture was extraordinary. And I couldn't wait to try this again, doing everything exactly the same, except for the part where it falls. So yes, that's what happened on the first attempt. And now we can return to my second, slightly less tragic unmolding. And I decided to help hide the evidence. I would cover the top with a little bit of sauce, and I eventually finished with a little sprinkling of Italian parsley. And by the way, I really wasn't that angry I dropped the first one. All right, that's a physical mistake, and those will happen. All right, last week I saw Steph Curry dribble a basketball off his foot. But what really upset me about that first one is that I didn't take note of that polenta sticking to the pan, since I could have put a piece of parchment paper in there, and this would have been avoidable on the second one. So that, my friends, was the actual mistake. But anyway, the good news is it did stay together pretty well, and I grabbed a spatula and cut out a pretty nice piece. And then grabbed a fork so I could make sure it tasted as good as I thought the first one did. Oh, and I just threw this piece on a plain plate, because I really wanted to taste it while it was still hot. But after a few bites, I did plate one up properly, so I could take some contractually obligated pictures. After which I grabbed a fork and continued eating, and my first impression was correct. This really was fantastic. Okay, it really does taste like lasagna, and even if you're not a huge fan of polenta, because we cook it once and then bake it for an hour, something sort of magical happens to the texture and the taste. And not only does it become very, very mild and subtly sweet, but somehow, some way, the texture gets really light and fluffy. And I know this might sound crazy, but this was like I was eating a lasagna souffle. I told you it was going to sound crazy, but that's exactly how tender and light this was. And know that arugula salad was not just a prop, although it was mostly that. But as you've heard me say many times, cooking is contrasts. And if you're going to serve a big hunk of something that's soft and rich, and we don't really have any naturally occurring textural contrast, those cold, crunchy, slightly bitter greens are a perfect pairing. But anyway, that's it. What I'm calling polenta lasagna loaf. Not only did I show you a very easy, very comforting, very delicious dish, you got to see me drop one on the table. So be careful if you try to unmold yours. Or just take the easy way out, and after letting it rest, just scoop it out with a spoon or spatula, which would be safer, but not nearly as exciting. But either way, I really did love everything about this, which is why I really do hope you give this a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.